Surviving online school?
Starts tomorrow for the U of O.
That could be interesting. Is everybody online or is it both in and out? Surviving online school?
Whoop, hold on 1 second. Starts tomorrow. Oh, got the live stream up. It is like 99% online.
Okay. That's what I thought. I did hear.
Herb and Allen.
Like they were saying they had to do.
It's a weird one. Like the ones that are in person are some of the chemistry labs and like architecture studio.
Okay.
But other and it's limited down to like 8 people at a time. And supposedly, like the people who are running the labs for chemistry have been given the green light to boot people if they are not being socially distanced. Like it's just no questions asked. It's like, you're out, get out of here.
Well, they should be able to do that.
Yes,
otherwise they're not safe then.
No, I agree. It was just having heard from some of those people, many students don't necessarily feel, because so many of them are peers. It's like, who am I to, like, do I have that authority to boot you? Do I not? So I know some students were very concerned with that. But
well, if you were screwing around in my class and I was a student peer, I'd boot your ass right out. I wouldn't have a problem with it.
Yeah, and thankfully all the students that I work with, that I employ, we're doing everything remotely, so they don't even have to worry about it.
That's, I think, how it needs to be until, I mean, our numbers are up. So as soon as we get everybody on campus, it's going to go crazy.
Yep.
They need to figure that out.
Yeah, I have some coworkers that are on campus because they're being told they have to be.
Yeah.
And
that's kind of what I heard, is that they were being told they had to be on campus teaching too. So
yeah, what did they do? I'm thankfully not involved with it, but the advisors have like a concierge desk. Like all advising is supposed to be remote, but then they decided that they were essentially going to have a giant welcome desk and just, oh, you have questions. We have 2 on staff, advisors who can help you direct. And it's like, what are we doing? But, I'm not the person who makes those decisions. So.
Right. That's crazy. That's crazy. Hi, Kylie. Saw your name in the paper.
Yeah, me too.
Big time star.
Better quotes than I was expecting. So that's always nice.
That's nice. That's nice.
Yeah, it was a fun piece to work on. It was.
Well, and I'm sure that the smoke really messed up all wet hop stuff.
Yeah, we were supposed to go out to a farm Tuesday morning after Labor Day, and I called the farm at 7:30 in the morning, and I said, everything's a shit show. Are we still coming? And they were like, yep. And I was like, okay, I'm getting in the car. I'm on my way. And I got to Corvallis, and they're like, just kidding, we're closing. And I was like, all right, I'm turning around.
we got evacuated from a campground on the Santiam at 5:30 in the morning on Tuesday after Labor Day.
Yeah.
Oh, good grief.
I didn't realize that there were fires here as well until we drove down the 5 and went, oh my God, there's something going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Well, and all of Herb's hops came on early. So he actually got to wet hop.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
I did a wet hop saison.
Ooh.
With Harriet's hops.
With Harriet's hops.
Nice.
Okay, go. Get your beer.
So, yeah, I got to get my beer still. Yeah, good article. That was yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Yesterday.
Yeah, Sunday. Yep.
I'm not participating. I'm not the logger in the family.
Well, yeah, you knew I would be on here with the loggers. So.
Yep.
Have a good
So is the guy live or is it just like a pre?
No, he'll be here.
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
That was making
He said like 30, 40-minute talk. So
okay.
no, he this is one of those things like the AHA is doing. Since Kylie's involved a little bit with the AHA, she might have to get roped into somebody else's meeting, but like the governing committee and like all the volunteers that are part of AHA are being asked to volunteer their time to
Yeah.
drop in at other club meetings and talk about something.
Is this guy back east?
I don't think so. I think he's Colorado.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not like
Not
that.
too bad, but
All right.
I didn't read that article until like 4 o'clock this afternoon.
I didn't see it till this morning.
Yeah, it came out on Sunday. My style eye has run away.
I might be sitting on it. You might be sitting on it.
Somebody might be sitting on it.
But I figured it would be easier to actually sit on the couch and not on the
There
floor.
it is. That looks amazing.
Mm-hmm. It is always so unintuitive that
You have to go to participants.
the
to invite.
participants arrow is the invite link.
Mhm.
That just makes no sense. That was literally me. You watched me type that.
I didn't know it was Discord. Could have been some of the grams. I just put out some cute pictures on the grams. Yeah.
Yeah.
I split that quince cider with Kelly and Dana yesterday. That was delightful.
Yes. Okay. I haven't tried that one yet.
It's very good. Yeah, Kelly brought the Baumans, so we had that.
Oh, the Stevens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we tried.
Pardon?
And then we tried the Little Beast coconut beer. It's very coconutty, Brian.
It's really weird.
It is.
Really weird.
Yeah.
Well, so I guess I had internal assumptions. Like I read barrel aged coconut and cherries. Like just take those three things, right? And I immediately go dark brown, black. That's what I'm expecting. And it's a pale sour that has really, really nice cherry colors. Um, and then coconut. And it is the weirdest thing I've had in a long time.
Why did they even add coconut? If they would have left off coconut.
Because it's like super tropical coconut. It's not like pina colada coconut. It's like fruity coconut.
I don't buy it.
Well, you did buy it, but
I'm gonna drink it.
so with all my emailing about passcodes and needing waiting rooms and all that other BS, 2 hours after I sent that email, the U of O sends me an email. They're like, just kidding.
Just kidding.
Well, because what happened was Zoom was going to do it, and institutions of higher learning were so pissed they got an onslaught of hate mail essentially, and then they're like, oh, never mind. But Kylie's account still does that.
Mine still has that stupid permissions on it as of this morning.
Amos did too.
Yeah. So apparently only universities are exempt.
What you got, Matt?
We're having the same thing.
Lager beer.
It's my only lager. Sorry, Dave.
Oh,
Hi, Dave.
How's that?
Much better.
Better? Good.
Now I can hear you.
yeah.
Good.
Welcome. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure. Glad I can be here.
So we were just I was complaining that the email I sent you, that was like, passcodes and all that. But it sounds like it's not across all Zoom platforms, so who knows? I don't know. Whatever. We're here. We made it. This day is almost over.
It's always nice when a Monday is in the books.
Yeah, no, I'm ready for it. Tomorrow is the start of academics at the University of Oregon, so today was intense.
Will you guys be mostly remote or a mix or?
We're mostly remote.
Okay.
But the department I work in does academic support. And so not me, but a coworker of mine has tried to figure out how to work with the directive to give some sort of in-person tutoring option for students.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, I don't have to wrap my head around that one. No, mine was just, I think it's like 36 student employees. And so today was orientation day.
Okay.
It's like, here we go.
Yep.
Tomorrow's go day.
Yep. It just got real.
And I have no idea how many people we're expecting. We fluctuate from about this to, I think the largest Zoom meeting we've had so far is 20.
Do you ever find out how many people actually log in to like YouTube later or not? Or like
no, because it never registers. So
Yeah.
like unless somebody actively goes and looks, I don't think
at the time?
we ever,
Yeah.
I think we get 2.
2 consistent viewers. Yeah.
One of them being old Matt.
Nice.
Oh, I should do this just before I forget it. I'm gonna make Dave co-host because I am going to forget at some point unless I'm thinking about it. Brian, what the hell are you doing?
She was on the phone.
Oh my goodness. So normally I would have some slides so we could just have an agenda and we could go from there. And like I mentioned, I was doing orientation and training today.
So
I did.
what you're saying is that today you have a hidden agenda.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I did 4 hours of setting agendas and running people through things. So I'm just going to do stuff verbally and then probably sit back, enjoy what Dave has to say and enjoy some lager because I am in dire need at this point. So just, and Mark, good choice in beer. That's 3 of us.
What? Oh, road beers.
Kelly, that's not a lager.
Queen of Hearts.
Brian's like, wait, what?
I drank them all already.
Okay.
First.
So just as a rundown, and Mark, I'm going to toss at you to talk about club only comp in a little bit. But essentially where we sit is the same place in your living room at your dining room table, enjoying some beer and doing this socially distanced. I don't see this changing for probably the rest of this year. The biggest thing is considering what's coming up at the end of the year, or at least what would have been coming up, and that was the annual holiday party. And luckily I don't have to come to the club and ask for a host this year, because we're not doing that. But what we are going to do is we're going to have some semblance of the holiday party. And granted, yes, it will be on Zoom. What we wanted to do and what was brought up in the ECN, we're going to try and run with this, is re-envisioning the White Elephant gift exchange. So instead of it being a giant, free-for-all of stealing this present and that present, and then re-gift, going through that whole thing, the thought is to do a sign-up for a Secret Santa. And I'm just sharing that right now so that you all have the information before you read the email with all the details about signing up for the said Secret Santa. So the goal would be to get people signed up. Kylie has found a really interesting platform that, I don't know, you can talk about it, it.
Sort of
Okay.
done initial research. It looks like you can sign up, and then when we close signups, it'll pair you with somebody, and within that platform you can there's questions you can answer, or your Santa can privately message you and you won't know who they are. They have questions about whatever your favorite strawberry covered chocolate whatever thing is.
Favorite hop, come on, favorite hop.
That's a default question. So I think the other question that we'll ask is, for outlying members, sort of trying to figure out how we're going to run North Eugene and East Eugene and West Eugene. So we'll figure that out.
We will figure out a way to keep all parties who are not in the Eugene Springfield metro area involved in some way. But essentially it would be an option to replace it. And that way we still can have a holiday party of some sort. I can promise to wear my beard ornaments like I did a couple years ago. So I'll be in the holiday spirit, and you can choose not to come because you don't want to see that again. That's entirely fine. Other than that, I don't really have a whole lot other than tossing it to Mark to talk about the next club only comp, because that's coming up in November.
Yeah, so we kind of decided as a group in the last meeting that we would skip meads this year and only judge ciders. So the information will be forthcoming on a club only competition, kind of in the same style as the Belgian. I'll drop off ciders to each of the judges, and they'll get judged over Zoom. We will probably broadcast the link so we can have hecklers, for lack of a better term, and maybe even some smack talk on the Discord. So information will be coming out soon about dates and due dates and all that stuff. Like Michael, I've kind of been in, oh crap, everything is starting mode. My youth orchestra that I conduct is starting tomorrow, so things are crazy. So look for emails on that soon. But like Michael said, it'll be sometime in November, probably the second week. I had to look at the calendar though. I don't think there's anything else that I'm forgetting. So
Is there
that should be about it for me.
Mark, are we going to do a Big Beers in December?
Maybe we can talk about that for a second. Who has big beers that they would be willing to give up several bottles of to be judged? Okay. Lukewarm. Right. we might be able to do that. I haven't thought that far ahead, honestly. It's been kind of nuts, but kind of really taking it one competition at a time right now. So, yeah, more information on that later, maybe in the next meeting.
Excellent. Other than that, run down my secret agenda in my head. I think that's it. Friendly reminder, we do have a Discord. So if Dana or Mark wanted to share that link in case there are people who are not on there and wanted to participate, it is another platform, but it is there's some memes that get shared that don't get shared elsewhere, and some other links to some crazy things that aren't necessarily Homebrew Club related. Dana's got the link there, so if you are interested, you can join that Discord. And then other than that, I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's kind of the same old, and we're still on Zoom. Reminder about the weekly happy hours. So if you feel so inclined, show up Fridays at 5:30. We're doing the Zoom happy hours every single Friday on this platform through that link that's on the website, and we will share it out every week. Come join us. Please come and drink beer while Kylie and I decide to take the entire month of October off. It's an annual tradition. It's one of those things that we're gonna just keep doing.
So is running of the bulls. That doesn't make it a good idea.
I mean, come on.
I'm kidding. I understand.
You can just come watch me, sadly drink my seltzer water with bitters added to it, and you all can enjoy your beer or wine or cider or what have you, and we'll be sitting here being
Whole 30 approved.
Whole 30, baby. So, other than that, I would, before we turn it over to Dave, which I did remember to give Dave co-host privileges so he can share his stuff. In case there are people that, wanted to have an announcement, or wanted to talk about, well, I guess one thing we can talk about too, since Brant, you're here, one thing people should know is that registration things for Camp Out kind of got messed up. And so we do not have Clark Creek reserved for next August on our traditional weekend. Not necessarily the end of the world as we know it, but I would ask that if people have ideas for alternative locations to connect with Brant. And Brant, I don't know if anyone's provided some suggestions to you. Or if
no, actually,
more.
Yeah, actually, I haven't really got it. I was like totally bummed that we got skunked, and I thought I had it locked in like usual. And I think maybe it's a 2020 curse. I don't know, but anyhow, maybe one of the one possibility that we might have is a place called Camp Serene that is actually a no-tie. It's like a mile from Denny's house. And I'm gonna get a hold of them, but I know that TK has helped set up some pretty big weekends for a fundraiser, and we're talking about like live music and, you know, and it could be a good possibility. So I'll see that's my best option at this point. So I don't know any of the details, but I'm totally open to any other.
Herb, do you know, does Riverbend have a group camping spot? Don't they have one?
They do, actually, yeah. It's when you first come in, it's over on the left. It's probably 5 or 6 sites, but they do have, you know, I mean, you can spread out. I know they have a table, you know, an area for people to congregate. Yeah, the only thing with that is there are other campers there, so like at 10 o'clock we'd have to keep it quiet.
Right.
I mean, it's a beautiful place. It's gorgeous. But
And it's close.
We're going to be out there in 2 weeks, so you and I can look at that and
Okay.
walk you through there.
We'll look at it, Brant, and get back to you.
Okay, yeah, I really, you know, I know that it's just the way it goes, but they changed the reservation window, and maybe I just didn't get the nuance and got up really early and found out the entire summer weekends were booked completely. So yeah, wasn't that happy, but maybe we'll be able to come up with a good backup venue somewhere. So hopefully we'll still be able to get together.
So Herb and I took a drive before the fires hit up the McKenzie and headed back down 20. And there is a group campground. It's pretty rough, dry. They have pump water. They had a pit toilet, and there's, you know, there's enough room people could get in. It's right off the highway, but you can rent it. And didn't he say it was $150?
Something like that a night.
A night. It's right off of the 20.
You can rent the entire campground. I think there's 10 sites or
10
something.
sites, but I think you're not limited to just 10 campers.
No.
You can take the whole area. We drove in and had lunch there, and there was an old dude there that had rented the campground. I mean, I don't think there's a water source there. Like, you can't go cool off. You're in the higher elevation. It's right after the turnoff between 126 and 20. But we can definitely look into that. It would be private, and then nobody would matter if everybody was screaming and hollering at midnight.
Dancing on tables and
Michael.
that fun stuff. Hey.
But Riverbend, I don't think Riverbend will do it because they're locked down. You're making them higher than a normal voice at 10 o'clock, and they're telling you to stop talking. So they're pretty strict there, but this other place may work. It's just very dry.
There's a few around, you know, you have time to look, so probably.
Yeah,
well, I think with, you know, I don't know how booked out someplace like Camp Serene would be, but that, for me, that
would be close.
That's my primary target right now. Oh, it's really close, you know, and it's got a disc course, frisbee disc golf course. It's on the Long Tom, and I think there's a lake. And I know that they've had some pretty raucous gatherings there with the ship parties. Right? So I need to look into that pretty quick and maybe talk to TK about how that works. So that's my best possibility right now.
And then I would just say, Christy threw in the chat, is the coast too far to go? And I mean, if I would say it's relative to where. I don't know if Brian or Christy want to elaborate on which section of the Oregon coast they were talking about. Okay, I think he's going to chat. So.
Okay. No, there is a large group camp area of Jesse Honeyman outside of Florence that is relatively remote by comparison to the rest of the campground. But talk about amenities and all kinds of other stuff that's right around there. It would make for a different kind of camping weekend, that's for sure.
And I don't know if the state parks are still doing you can only reserve a month in advance, but that would at least leave it open until they stop doing that. So that would be another option.
Unless of course, you know the park manager who will just take it off the reservation system.
Do we know someone who knows the park manager perhaps? Okay.
It's not what you know.
It's who you know.
Well, there's another thing for that, but yeah, who? Yeah, it's great.
Well, excellent. So again, just keep lines of communication open, especially with Brant, if you do have other thoughts, because again, people come across sites and have thoughts. So I just want it out there, but I also don't want it to be a surprise. I mean, it sucks that it is what it is right now. But it is one that, just in the interest of sharing with the club, not that we're not going to go camp outing. Well, I mean, I would vote that we do camp out if we have a vaccine at that point in time, because that's going to be lovely, especially if we all can get it. But it is one that, just so we can keep it on the books on the off chance that it can happen.
Yeah, I totally think we need to try to get something set up, and if the vaccine, COVID's still around, we could back off, but yeah, we got a plan for it, definitely. And I'm totally still on board with all of it.
Yeah. And so I guess the only other thing I would say before we turn it over to Dave and not waste more of his evening by listening to us chatter about different places in Oregon, is if anybody else has any questions or concerns that they want to talk about, we can also do that after Dave's talk. But I do want to give space for people to do that now if they feel the need to. Dave, I think the floor is yours.
Cool, thanks. So I'm gonna first, let's see. I was gonna just mute everybody, but it looks like there's actually not much background noise. So we'll, if we get any background noise, we'll just ask everyone to mute. So then I'm gonna share my screen, I think. Let's try that. Everyone see that okay? Good. The obligatory Zoom check-in to make sure everyone can hear and see and so forth. Well, thanks very much for having me. Glad to be with you guys tonight. My name is Dave Carpenter. I am editor-in-chief of Zymergy Magazine, which if you're a member of the American Homebrewers Association, then that shows up in your mailbox every other month, or if you don't use the mailbox that often, it probably shows up on your mobile device. And we've been talking to homebrew clubs. AHA staff have been talking to homebrew clubs really ever since this inconvenient COVID stuff started. And just kind of a great way to connect with clubs and really to see how everyone's still finding a way to get together, even if it's in this odd virtual space that we've all kind of gotten used to, and for better or for worse. So I just wanted to mention that we do have a promo going on with all of our club talks. So if you're not already an AHA member, and I'll make sure that these slides go out after the talk, so you don't need to worry about screenshotting or anything like that. And all these links will be live. Every link that's in the talk is live, so you can just click straight through. But we do have a promo going on right now. So if you're not a member, you can take $5 off a new membership with Club 5 off as the promo code, or you can add a year to your existing membership for $5 off if you are already a member. And some people think, oh, well, I just renewed. I don't want to lose that extra time, but it just adds to your current expiration date. It doesn't negate anything that you've already paid for. So if you expire a year from now, use that promo code, take $5 off, and you add another year to your expiration date. Just a little bit about me. I am editor of Zymergy, been doing that since January 2016. And I'm also author of a couple of books. The first one, well, actually it was the second one in the series, or in time. Lager, the kind of a mouthful, Lager, the definitive guide to tasting and brewing the world's most popular beer styles, which that's a Google search if I've ever heard one. But publisher comes up with that, not me. And then the Illustrated Guide to Homebrewing came out a year before that, and that's exactly what the title says. I am a certified BJCP judge. I am currently certified Cicerone, just sat the written portion of the advanced Cicerone exam last week, and the tasting portion will happen at some point in the future. I've been homebrewing for a little over a decade, and people always want to know what are your favorite beers, and all of them is apparently not an acceptable answer. So I put just a few of my favorite lagers there. If you just had to pin me down, Munich Helles, easy to drink. Well-brewed Helles is just gold to me. But I do love a good Bohemian Pilsner. Pale Keller beer, I actually just kegged a Keller beer yesterday. And then smoked beers of all kinds. So I really enjoy smoked beers, and I try to get other people to enjoy them as well. Sometimes that goes better than other times. You're probably already familiar with the basics, but don't want to assume anything. So we'll just go over a few of the basics about lager. It's a whole family of beer styles that are characterized with a cold fermentation, and cold for us means 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. It is a separate yeast species that ferments lagers, Saccharomyces pastorianus, named for Louis Pasteur. And it is a hybrid of two parent strains or species. Saccharomyces cerevisiae is ale yeast that we all know and love. And Saccharomyces eubayanus is the second parent that up until a few years ago was unknown. They knew from DNA sequencing that it was two parents, but they hadn't found the second parent. And then some researchers, I guess with a bit of time on their hands, found it floating around down in Patagonia. And then they also found it afterwards in Mongolia. So somewhere along the way, it hybridized with ale yeast, and we got lager yeast. It historically has been characterized by an extended aging period near the freezing point of water. That's where the name comes from. The German word lagern means to store or to keep something. So lagering is that process of storage. And because it's a cold fermentation, you usually get fairly clean expressions of malt and hops without a whole lot of the yeast character that you get out of ale strains. What lager necessarily is not, and this is some of what got me interested in talking about lagers, is I got a little kind of annoyed with a misconception that all lager is something that, oh, my background took it out, that it's something fizzy and thin and yellow. This actually isn't. This is a background I stole from one of the local news anchors. Sort of as a joke, they put his background like on the web. So kind of as an inside joke on some of my calls, I put the news anchor's study in my Zoom call, and I just forgot to turn it off before this one. So, but I got kind of tired of people saying that lager is just, well, I like imperial stouts, I like wild and sour beers, I like double IPAs, but I just don't drink lager. It's boring. And what they mean by that is I don't like thin yellow beer, and that's perfectly fine. But there's so much more out there. And that's really what got me interested in talking about lagers, to dispel that myth that it automatically means Pilsner or, an American light lager. And along with that, the idea that it's somehow less flavorful than ale, that it's easier to brew than ale, or that there's automatically less alcohol than ale. And in fact, one of the strongest beers in the world, the Zombie Klaus from, well, I guess it's from Austria now, but it's about a 14% Doppelbock. And, you can put it next to any imperial stout, in my opinion. I just listed out a few of the best known lager styles here. Again, this is probably old news to most of you, but I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of ones we kind of forget, the sort of the lost children of the lager world. On the left there, California Common there at the very bottom is definitely in the lager family. It just happens to be fermented a little bit warmer than most lagers are. And then over there on the right, we have Baltic Porter, which is also a lager. It has a lot in common with Imperial Stout. And in fact, if you run across one of those folks who say, I just don't like lagers, but I love strong stouts, give them a Baltic Porter and hopefully their life will change. Ingredient selection. If you are an ale brewer, you're comfortable brewing those, then you're 3/4 of the way there, because regardless of what tradition dictates for certain styles, you could make any lager with the malt, hops, and water of your choice. There's nothing to say that you have to stick to traditional European malts or noble hop varieties. If you've got some Maris Otter on hand and some Cascade hops and you want to brew a lager using that, then don't let style guidelines keep you from doing so. You can make some really great beers doing that. Where it is good to sort of observe tradition is if you're brewing for competition or really wanting to nail some of those traditional styles, then I think it makes sense to look at those styles and really select ingredients that are suited to those. When it comes to yeast, that's really where things change for lager brewing. There's a ton of options, more available now than really at any point for home brewers. It's kind of an embarrassment of riches these days. So Weihenstephan 3470 is kind of the lager workhorse. It's super easy to use. It's really forgiving. We'll talk about this later, but you can ferment it at a wide range of temperatures. And really, if you have no reason to do anything different, Weihenstephan 3470 can get you there. So then there are some other German lager strains, Augustiner, Andex. Those are all really nice. There's a whole bunch of them out there. The Czech lager strains may throw a little bit more of the that butterscotch diacetyl kind of flavor. Swiss lager S189 from Fermentis is a pretty popular lager strain. It's really good for high gravity fermentations. California lager would be the ones that are associated with like Anchor Steam, the California Common style. Then American lager strains, there's a ton of those as well. They tend to have names in the marketplace that are names of cities that have big breweries. So, St. Louis lager or Rocky Mountain lager or Patriot lager, those sorts of things. So you can sort of tease out where the strain may or may not have come from. And once you've decided you're going to brew a lager, then you have to make some wort. And really, there doesn't have to be a big difference between ale wort and lager wort. And in fact, we could really skip this slide altogether and say, just do a single infusion mash and get on with your life. And in fact, that's the first bullet point there. If you're using a modern malt, which really all of us are, unless you know somebody who can get you under modified malt, then you can convert that mash with a single temperature and you'll be all good. Where I think a step mash can be beneficial is if you want a little bit more crispness out of your lager. One thing that I see a lot in commercially brewed lagers from craft breweries is kind of a full-bodied, chewy aspect almost, which I think comes from using those single temperature mashes. By doing a step mash where you change the temperature and you go from you use maybe a protein rest, but rarely these days, but maybe you do a beta amylase rest and then an alpha rest, you're promoting the activity of those enzymes in their preferred temperature ranges, and that helps with starch conversion, with attenuation. So you end up, I think, in the end with a kind of a crisper beer that has a good mouthfeel to it without being overwhelmingly chewy. So if you do decide to do a step mash, then you have various ways of getting from one step to the next. And the easiest for a lot of homebrewers, myself included, is to add hot water. So if you mash in a converted picnic cooler, then adding hot water is a really easy way to bring up the temperature from one step to the next. If you have the ability to direct heat your mash, say with if you have like a Herms system or something, then you can apply direct heat and do it that way. And then decoction is the probably the most controversial still among homebrewers, where you remove a portion of the mash and you boil it and you for a period of time, and then you add it back to the main mash to bring that temperature up. And you'll get opinions sort of, you know, if you ask 20 homebrewers if decoction makes a difference, you'll get 30 different answers. And then you mentioned Denny earlier, and he has some very strong opinions about decoction as well. Where I would say as a homebrewer, it can come in really handy is if you mash in a cooler like I do, then you can use hot water infusions to get yourself part of the way there. But as you continue to add hot water to the mash, it gets thinner and thinner, and achieving a temperature change gets harder and harder as you get close to the end of your mash schedule and you run out of mash tun. And where a decoction can come in really handy is if you need to move to another temperature. Frequently happens to me like close to mash out, where a mash tun is full, but the mash tun's full, I'm still at the alpha amylase stage and I want to hit mash out. Then a nice way to do that is to pull part of the mash out and do a decoction, and you can achieve that temperature step even though you can't directly heat your mash tun. So it can offer some benefits to the homebrewer just from a purely practical standpoint. But there are also some sensory things associated with decoction mashes, and I'm not here to really say you should or shouldn't do them. I think that's really up to you. But I don't buy the idea that they don't make a difference. You got two beers here. Rothaus Pils on the left is a really great Southern German Pilsner, and Pilsner Urquell there on the right is the classic, the original Pilsner lager. And the grist on these is pretty similar, and the main difference between them in terms of the mash anyway is that the Rothaus goes through a step mash that is just a straight temperature change, whereas the Pilsner Urquell goes through a triple decoction protocol. And there's no caramel malt in that beer. It's that color is strictly from the intensive mash that it goes through. And it brings out some bready kind of flavors and some nuances that you don't really get from just doing a straight infusion mash. So again, not to say you should or should not do a decoction, but I think it's something every homebrewer who's interested in lagers should try at least once. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. And you don't have to spend all day doing decoctions. You can pull one decoction at the end to do mash out and get a lot of benefit just from that. So regardless of how you get your wort, then once it's ready, then you need to ferment it with something. And that comes down, that's when we start talking about lager yeast selection. And like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of lager strains out there, and you kind of have your embarrassment of riches there when you go to the homebrew store or place your order online. One nice thing about choosing a lager strain is that it's not as critical to the outcome as choosing an ale strain. So you can take, let's say, a 50-50 blend of Pilsner malt and wheat malt, and you can ferment that with a Saison yeast or an American ale yeast or a German Hefeweizen yeast, and you're going to get three very, very different beers. But if you take that same grist and you ferment it with three different lager strains, you're going to get three beers that do have differences, but they have more in common than they have differences. Some will throw a little more sulfur, some will tend to attenuate a little bit more or less, but really lager strains have more in common than they do difference. So my suggestion is to really just pick one yeast to start with. If you've never brewed lagers before, pick one strain and really just kind of get to know it, because you'll learn a lot. I tend to use Weihenstephan 3470 9 times out of 10. It's easy to use, and I know how it behaves. I was talking with Vinny Chilurso, who was the head brewer and owner at Russian River Brewing Company. And he said that when they started upping the production of their STS Pilsner, they had to put their lager yeast through a lot of different trials just to get to know how it worked. He said that they actually knew more about, because of their sour program, they actually knew more about how Brettanomyces and lacto worked than they did lager yeast. So a lot of their work up front with that beer was just getting to know the yeast. So I think that's something we shouldn't be afraid to do. One place where I will differ a little bit from some recommendations is that I really do favor pitching cold. Especially on the yeast manufacturer side, you'll see a lot of advice about pitching at room temperature and then wait till you see stuff happening, and then cool it down. I'm sure there must be people who brew good beer doing that, and I know there are because I've tasted their beer. It's just never worked for me. I've never brewed a beer that I really enjoyed doing it that way. So I have no problem letting the wort wait. I usually finish brewing sometime around dinner time or maybe a little bit after. And my chilling process, I can't get the wort down to 48 or 50 degrees in a reasonable period of time. So I have no problem sticking it in the chest freezer and waiting until the next day to pitch the yeast when the wort is nice and cold. And by doing it that way, I think you can avoid a lot of the off flavors that you sometimes get with homebrewed lagers. And finally, don't worry about the rotten eggs. If you do it that way and you pitch cold, then you're almost certainly going to get this sulfuric aroma, for lack of a better term, that can be quite. It can permeate the whole area, like let's say an entire garage. I know this, but when it will lager out. And if you do it properly, you don't the rotten egg smell won't stick around in the final beer. When talking about about choosing yeast, then we come down to kind of, well, do you want to use liquid yeast or dry yeast? And we're not going to go into Kveik yeast in this talk. That's a whole other thing. We're just going to stick with traditional lager yeasts here. So assuming you're doing that, for a liquid pitch, I like to calculate the number of cells. And a good pitch rate for lagers is going to be about twice to a little more than twice what you would normally pitch for an ale. And so that means anywhere from 1 million to 2 million cells per milliliter of wort per degree Plato of original extract. If you convert that into terms that homebrewers typically use, that means for 5 gallons of what kind of standard 1050 wort, then you're looking at 350 to 475 billion cells that you need. If you go up into a little closer into Bach territory, 1060 wort, then you're looking at 500 or more billion cells for 5 gallons. That's a lot of yeast cells, and a typical commercial yeast pitch for a homebrewer, a pack might have 100 to 200 billion cells in it. So if you just run the math on that, you're looking at anywhere from 3 to 6 yeast packs if you just use the fresh yeast. So you can buy a lot of yeast if you want to do that, especially if you aren't comfortable making a starter or can't really maintain the sanitation on it. But if you can make a starter, that's a really economical way, I think, to kind of step up your yeast. I like to use the calculator at Brewer's Friend, but there are a ton of calculators out there. Beersmith has one. Mr. Malty is a classic one. Just kind of use the one that you prefer, and you can calculate how big of a starter that you need to use. I like the one at Brewer's Friend because it allows you to do up to 3 stages of your starter. So for my lagers, I usually do a 2-stage starter. So I will do the first stage at room temperature, 2 liters of kind of 1035 wort. I'll propagate that at room temperature and then crash it in the fridge when it's done. And then I'll prepare a really big starter of up to 5 liters, depending on the beer. And I will then decant the first step, pitch the yeast into the second starter at fermentation temperature. So first stage at room temperature, second stage at fermentation temperature, with the goal being that whenever I'm done brewing, I can pitch that whole starter into the wort, and it's already fermenting. It's active and it's healthy. Dry yeast, I tend to think about it just in terms of weight or number of packs. Dry yeast is super easy to work with. You don't have to make starters, and in fact, it's not generally a good idea to do so. It's usually easier just to buy additional yeast packs. And this is an area when you ask the question, how much yeast is in a pack of dry yeast, you're going to get wildly different answers depending on whom you ask. Lallemand and Fermentis both say somewhere around 5 or 6 billion cells per gram. Mr. Malty, I think, has assumed 20 billion cells per gram. There are some amateur studies out there where they've done cell counts, and it really does depend on the manufacturer and the strain. I've seen numbers most in the like 10 to 15 billion cells per gram. So I try to balance going crazy with and spending too much money. So I just make a blanket assumption across all my dry yeasts, and I say I'm going to assume that there's 8 to 10 billion cells per gram. And what that means, ends up working out well. You get about 100 billion cells in one pack, which is the same as you get for liquid yeast. So the implication there is that you still need 3 packs of a lager yeast to inoculate 5 gallons of 1050 wort, which is a lot of yeast. Whenever I do a standard lager of, let's say, 1050 or so, I actually use 2 packs most of the time, and I'm happy with the results. But for something like a very strong Doppelbock, then I might use 4 packs. So really, kind of using your own experience is a good way to approach that. You can go to a yeast pitch calculator and do the math, but if you find you can get away with using a little less yeast and you like the results, then by all means do that. Once you've got the yeast in the wort, then that's where the magic happens. And the traditional schedule would be to hold it at a constant temperature for a period of time till it hits final gravity, and then slowly chill it down to a lagering temperature. So that's the yellow curve there, and that'll work. You can totally do it that way. But a more modern way to do it that's a little faster, and it's the way that most of the big breweries do it these days, is to do an initial cold fermentation at 48, 50, 52, wherever you are. And then at some point during the primary fermentation, you raise the temperature by a little bit. And we're not talking 20 degrees, we're talking 5 to 10 degrees. And what that does is it incorporates the diacetyl rest, which a lot of lager brewers do anyway, to kind of clean up that butterscotch flavor that may be there. But it accelerates yeast metabolism, and it just lets you finish out that phase a little more quickly. And then you could just go straight down to lagering temperature. There's really no need to incorporate any additional steps. The question does come up: when do you raise the temperature? And I think a good rule of thumb is when you have when you're about 2/3 of the way through your fermentable sugars. So to make the math easy, let's say it's a 1040 original gravity, and you expect it to finish out around 1010, then that's 30 gravity points you need to get through. So if you want to get through 2/3 of that, that means 20 gravity points need to go. So 20 gravity points down from 1040 is 1020. So at around 1020 for that beer, it would be a safe place to go ahead and raise the temperature before you go to the lagering phase. One thing that has become more popular in recent years among homebrewers is to do pressurized fermentations. And again, a number of the big lager breweries do it this way. Fermenting under pressure, basically it suppresses the ability for the yeast to form esters and phenols. And so you can get away with a higher temperature, and that means it goes faster. And in the past, that would have been kind of difficult to do as a home brewer because no one should pressurize a glass carboy under any circumstances. But stainless has become a little more affordable. And certainly there's a lot of great stainless products out there now that more of us are able to get our hands on. And so if you have the ability to ferment in a stainless vessel, even a keg, then you could use a lager yeast with about an atmosphere of pressure on it, allow that pressure to build up as the fermentation progresses. And you can ferment at close to room temperature. And it only takes a few days. And then you only need to lager it for a handful of days. You could turn out a lager in less than 2 weeks. And in fact, White Labs uses this, their WLP 925, I think they use for most of their lagers these days. Because it allows them to turn them around really quickly for their tap rooms. There are some homebrewers who have taken it a step further and just totally go warm. Room temperature, no temperature control, just let her rip. And I haven't done it, but that doesn't mean it can't work. And what I would point you to there is there's a talk, and again, it's linked to here, that was given at HomebrewCon a couple years ago, where a Jose Pizarro, who's from Fermentis, gave the talk, and they have put Weihenstephan 3470 through a number of trials, and they varied the original gravity of the wort, they varied the pitch rate, and they varied the fermentation temperature. And then they took the beers and they gave them to a sensory panel, and they also measured levels of acetaldehyde and esters and so forth. So they had lab measurements as well, and they found that under the right conditions of pitch rate and original gravity, that the 3470 strain performed pretty well up to about 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty warm. It's you're well into ale territory, so there's definitely evidence to support the idea. Beyond just anecdotal evidence, there's scientific evidence to support the idea that you can ferment at least some lager strains at around room temperature and still turn out a clean beer. So if you don't have temperature control or aren't interested in bothering with that, then definitely check out that talk. There's some really good information in there. They're actually in the process of characterizing all their strains. So it's not just lager yeast they're doing this with, they're doing it with all the Fermentis strains. And they're putting all that info on their website too. So if you really want to geek out on that kind of thing, head over to the Fermentis website, and you can read all kinds of stuff. The lagering phase, again, is where the beer where the styles get their name from. And historically, it means a long period of cold conditioning near the freezing point of water. And I don't want to discourage anyone from doing that. I do that whenever I can. But I have found that fermentation is more critical to getting a clean lager than the lagering phase. So if I'm really good about pitching cold and monitoring fermentation and not letting it get too hot, then I can be a little sloppier with the lagering part. And I've often, or I shouldn't say often, but a number of times I've lagered at room temperature. And my reason for bringing this up isn't to discourage you from doing the lagering phase. I think there is some cleanup that happens there. The lager yeasts are still active at that cold temperature. They're still doing some work there. Certainly the beer's dropping brighter. But I bring it up because not everyone has more than one temperature controlled environment. So if you have one chest freezer that you control and you devote a lager in there for let's say 2 weeks at 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you need to put it into the lagering phase, do you really want to dedicate your whole chest freezer to close to the freezing point when you could be using it to brew a saison or a stout or something while the lager's cleaning up? So I bring it up only to suggest that if you only have one temperature controlled environment, use it to brew other beers. Don't tie it up for weeks, holding it at close to freezing just to turn out that one beer. There are a few, you can have any off flavor in a lager that you can have in an ale, but there are a few that are more intimately associated with lager brewing. dimethyl sulfide, DMS, which is commonly described as a corn-like flavor. I usually pick it up more as a kind of a canned tomato sauce kind of aroma or flavor. Some people describe it as cabbage or even shellfish. There's nothing necessarily particular to lager brewing that brings out DMS. It's simply that most pale lagers have a lot of Pilsner malt in them, and Pilsner malt is where you get most of the DMS from. So, so if you're brewing a very light lager, then yeah, DMS is something you need to pay attention to. Diacetyl over there on the right, often described as butterscotch, movie theater popcorn. Every yeast strain out there produces it as part of their metabolism. It's just that ale fermentations are so crazy that it all gets blown out of the airlock, whereas lagers are cold and they tend to hold on to it a little bit better. It can be okay in a handful of styles from the Czech Republic in particular, but you never need to go out of your way to add that to your beer. It's okay if a little bit shows up in certain styles, but if the BJCP guideline says, small amounts are okay, don't try to put it in there because the yeast will take care of that. And then the two sulfur compounds, sulfur dioxide, almost any pale lager, particularly like German style pale lagers, will and I would even say should have just a little bit of a sulfur, almost like a whiff, even just a hint of that struck match character. It does add something to the beer, I think. And again, that's not something that you should try to put in there, but lager yeast just produces it as part of its metabolism. And if a little bit's in there, it's okay. Hydrogen sulfide, on the other hand, is never okay. That's the rotten egg aroma and flavor. That's the one that should be coming out of the airlock when the fermentation's taking place, stinking up your garage. And then if you allow the temperature to come up even a little bit there at the end of fermentation, that'll all get kind of taken care of. So just a few to kind of keep an eye on if you're new to lager brewing. Just a couple of advanced topics as we wrap up here. Spunding is something that, again, has become more available to homebrewers as more pressure capable vessels are available. And it's really nothing more than using the primary fermentation to naturally carbonate the beer. And German brewers have been doing it for ages because the Reinheitsgebot doesn't allow you to introduce CO2 from outside the brewery. You can't add priming sugar. So how do you get carbonation? Well, you seal up the vessel a little bit before it's done, and it carbonates, which is all well and good unless your vessel explodes. So how do you figure out when to cap up the vessel? Well, you could sort of figure out, well, what is my final gravity going to be, and then sort of work backwards. Then you should be pretty sure what your final gravity is going to be. So either you've made the beer before, or you do a fast ferment test, or something that gives you some confidence about what final gravity will be. So let's just say that you expect final gravity to be 1.010, 1010, and you want two volumes of CO2 in your beer. Then every half a point of degree Plato, or 2 gravity points, will give you 1 volume. So if you wanted 2 volumes, which is a little on the low side, but it makes the math easy, then that's 4 gravity points. And so your lager that you expect to finish out at 1010, you would want to cap it up at around 1014 and allow it to naturally carbonate. A much easier way to do it is to use a spunding valve, which is really just a pressure relief valve that you can adjust to whatever pressure you want. So I've put 2 examples there. The top one there from Blickman is a tri-clamp version that goes on a conical, a stainless conical if you have one of those, or if you want to use a keg, then the example there from Brew Hardware just fits on the gas post of a keg. Again, you want to do this in a stainless vessel. Don't try it in glass. But really, you just dial in the pressure that you want, and whenever the fermentation exceeds that pressure, it'll blow it off. So if you set it at 5 psi, whenever the relief valve hits 5 psi, it'll let that excess pressure out. So it's a pretty safe way of carbonating your beer inside the fermentation vessel. The other method of carbonating that's also Reinheitsgebot compliant is krausening, and that involves adding actively fermenting beer to finished beer. So in Spunding, you allow the actively fermenting beer to carbonate itself. In krausening, you let the beer finish out, and then you add in a little bit of actively fermenting beer at the end, right before you seal it up. And the math can be kind of hard on krausening, which is why I don't think most of us ever bother with it. In a commercial brewery, it's super easy to do it because most commercial breweries have the same beer at various stages of fermentation. So if it's, if it's Pilsner bottling day, then you've got your finished Pilsner and you've got a Pilsner that's, almost to terminal gravity. You just take a little bit of that, put it in your finished beer, and then you bottle it. Home brewers are rarely in that position. If you're like me, you brew something different every time. So you really almost never have the same beer at different stages. So it's not something I generally recommend just because it can be kind of complicated. The one time when I would recommend it is if you bottle condition your beer and you have consistently run across oxidation issues. So if you kind of get some stale cardboard notes or the beer is starting to, turn brown and it shouldn't be brown, then you might look into krausening because then you can introduce that actively fermenting beer. The yeast will pick up some of that oxygen and help with that oxidation problem. Chris Colby did a really good job in the November-December 2018 issue of Zymergy on doing all the math. He even offers some alternative methods where you can use malt extract to prepare a little bit of additional beer to do that job. So if that's something you're interested in, that's a great article to reference. So if I had to distill it all down to 5 things, I would say don't be afraid to use non-traditional ingredients. By all means, brew with what you have, brew with what you like. But if you're looking to nail a classic style or you're brewing for competition, then certainly look into the traditional ingredients that are used. Maris Otter can make a great lager beer, but it's probably not going to fit the Pilsner category very well. Pitch more yeast than you think you need. And in order to, and you do that because you're going to ferment cold. So, and pitch even a little colder than your fermentation temperature. If you don't have the means to stress or to do the lagering phase the way it's typically described, don't worry about that too much. And finally, trust your own experiences and remember that just because something works professionally doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for homebrewers. And the opposite of that is true. I think a great kind of illustration of that is if you've ever gone to a brewery opening, like that first week that they're open and you try the beer, it's often not that great. But if you go back 6 months later, it is. And very frequently that happens because a really good home brewer is just trying to scale up their recipes and it takes some time to figure that out. So even though the math all works out, there's the practical experience of scaling. And the same is true in the opposite direction. You can read something in a brewing textbook that may work very well for really big cylindroconical fermenters, but in a 6-gallon bucket, it doesn't really make any difference. I threw in a few references here to take a look at. I threw mine on there just because, but Handbook of Brewing is a pretty good general purpose book. The yeast book from Chris White and Jamil Zainasheff is really good if you want to learn about yeast metabolism, yeast health, yeast propagation, anything like that. It's a good reference. It's not something you're probably going to sit down and read cover to cover, but it's a great reference text. One that you might sit down and read cover to cover, though, is A Brief History of Lager by Mark Dredge, which came out not too long ago. And it's just, if you're into history, it's 500 years of brewing history in a very reasonable volume. Dark Lagers came out I guess that was a couple years ago, actually. And even though it's called Dark Lagers, I mean, that's what it's concerned with, but there's a lot of really good smoked beer stuff in there. So if you like smoked beer, Dark Lagers is worth picking up. Of course, my book, Noonan's book is a classic. And then Andreas Krenmeyer has been doing a lot of great work the last few years. He has his historic German and Austrian beers book, which there's a lot of, if you like historical recipes, there's a lot of great stuff in there, stuff that no one's really brewing. And then his relatively new Vienna Lager book is probably the definitive work on Vienna Lager, I would say. He's done just tons of primary source research. It's a really great book. I'll just remind you that we have this promo going on to take $5 off your membership, new or renewing. And again, we'll make sure that you get these slides afterwards. And that is all I have. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and take questions.
Dave, I got a question for you.
All right.
Let's say you're a relatively new home brewer and we don't have, a temperature controlled refrigerator and, we're doing our best. I guess, what do you think like the best way to get started is? Is it pitch rate? Is it temperature control? Like what's kind of maybe your first steps without like a super tricked out system?
I think pitch rate's a really good one. I think especially if you used if you use that Weihenstephan 3470 strain, pitch a lot of it, then you can get away with a little bit there. The California common strains are commonly didn't intend that, are commonly recommended, and I think those can get a little fruity personally. So actually, rather than going for those, I would maybe recommend like a Kolsch strain. Those can go a little warmer and still retain some of the lager-like characteristics. I mentioned Kveik earlier. I've not really experimented with that, but I know lots of people are and are turning out very clean beers. And so that's one way to explore. But I think a good place to start would be that W3470 strain. My recollection was that they took it up to almost 68 degrees Fahrenheit with 12-degree Plato wort, so around 1048, 1050 original gravity. So not a huge beer, but and that there were all the off flavors were well below the sensory threshold. So that would be the place I would start, would be that W3470.
Dave, there's a question in the chat that said, with step mashing and doing the hot water infusion that you were talking about, how do you account for mash thickness? So are you ending up with an overly thin mash at the end of doing the hot water infusion to raise the temp, or are you doing something else to account for that?
It's a really good question, and you do end up with a thin mash, and that's okay, because thick mashes tend to favor protein degradation. So the protease enzymes work better in thick mashes, whereas starch saccharification, starch conversion, does better in thin mashes. All of those enzymes have to be dissolved in water. And so, I mean, there's sort of a limit, like you don't want to have, broth, but for a reasonable mash that you would be able to fit in your mash tun, it's perfectly fine to thin that mash out. And in fact, most of our recommendations as homebrewers that we get about what mash thickness should be come from kind of the British tradition of a fairly thick mash. So, 1.25 quarts per pound or so. But you can, German breweries very frequently go with much thinner mashes because they're doing decoction mashes. And if you have a thick mash, you can't pump it to the decoction cooker. So your slurry pump will clog. So you need a thinner mash in order to be able to pump it from one vessel to the next. So thin mashes are fine, especially near the end. And in fact, someone mentioned Dickmeisch in the chat there. You take, when you're doing a decoction mash, the traditional way to do it is the first decoction is a very thick part of the mash, and then towards the end you take a very thin part of the mash. So you are kind of thinning things out as you go. What else we got? Well, I will, of course, make sure that you get the slides afterwards. My email address, I think, is in there. So if you have questions, by all means, feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll do my best to respond with hopefully not too much of a delay. And if there are no other questions, thanks for having me.
And Dave, thank you for taking the time out of your evening. So
yeah, my pleasure.
Invite you to stick around. I don't know what we have in store for the rest of the evening.
I would if I hadn't had if I didn't have dinner waiting. So I'm gonna go eat. But thank you, I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Dave. Thanks for taking the time again.
Yeah.
All right, you guys have a good evening.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, see you later.
Well, that was cool.
That was great.
Yeah. Go buy his book.
I didn't want to throw Herb, but other people did too. I was like, man, one of my favorite logger tech talks we've ever had was like Herb and the gentleman whose name I can't remember. And we have this like whole like treatise on like the technology of lager brewing, you know, and like all the fancy whiz bang tools you need to do it. And then Herb gets up there and he's like, yeah, I just throw a wet t-shirt on it.
Kind of. I am pretty low tech, I
it.
will say that.
It's all,
Yeah,
all
so-
you need.
The way I'm thinking of it is, you know, with the fall and winter coming on, we're getting into the herb brewing season.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so
That's why I wanted to watch this. It was good to see, you know, kind of get a little,
yeah.
maybe try to get pointers and stuff, but yeah. I would say, like you were saying before with the yeast, I mean, anybody who knows me knows I push California Common yeast like crazy. And it's you know, if you're just getting started in lager brewing, that is such a great one to use because it's so, you know, such a wide range. You don't have to be so technical. You don't have to be so precise. You can brew anywhere from 65 down to 50 on your fermentation, and it pretty much covers the whole thing very well. So.
Herb, what has been your experience with that yeast clarifying?
Excellent. In fact, it's one of the best ones I've ever used, and it's also a really super neutral flavor. I mean, I've used it in Doppelbocks and I've used it in Pilsners. I've used it in basically every lager I've ever done. At one point or another, I've used that yeast. I know that it's been a few years ago, but just for an experiment, every single lager I did for the entire winter, I only used that yeast. And if I'm not mistaken, I think on the Doppelbock, I ended up getting a blue KLCC with that yeast on that beer, which is pretty unusual. But I mean, that just shows how what a wide variety you can use that if you're just getting started and you really want something that you feel comfortable with. I use other yeast also. I mean,
one more follow up for yours. Part of the reason I asked is that we trialed out the Mangrove Jack's Dry California lager yeast, and I don't know, it might have been processed or not, but Kylie brewed with it, I brewed with it, and they both took forever to clear. So I wonder, were you using the liquid? Like, was it a Y yeast or was it?
Yeah, I've used the Y yeast, which is I think that's the California
2112.
2112 exactly. Y yeast it's called San Francisco Lager, and Imperial it's called Cable Car, and it's just all the same. But yeah, the liquid I've never used the dry, so.
Well, for Dave's talk, gosh, it probably wasn't enough.
No, that's another good point because it's interesting. I thought that dry yeast part was really interesting because I've always kind of wondered about the yeast cell count on dry yeast packs because they're dirt cheap compared to
Yeah.
the liquid. So
And Herb,
You
you do a
know,
bunch of
people who swear by the dry yeast, more along the lines of the ales. I don't know. I've just always stuck with the.
Herb, you
liquid.
do a bunch of repitching too, right?
That's it.
You move through the same yeast through different batches through the year.
Yeah. I'll usually start my first lager is almost always just a Pilsner or something, a low original gravity. And then from that point on, then I just recycle it from the primary, and then I got, all the yeast I ever want at that point. Up until, I use it 3 or 4 times, and then that's it. I won't go.
Yeah, I actually reached out. I was texting him when he said using 3 packs of wet yeast. And I'm like, there's no way Herb does that. And sure enough, he said, no, just the first one's, low OG. And then after that, just keep using what's been multiplied already. So,
well, I mean, the good argument there is if you're going to make a starter, why not drink it when it's done? Like, if you're really going to have to grow up that much yeast, and if you can do it,
Yeah.
hopefully you can do it in such a way you can consume the liquid and not have to decant and pour it down the drain.
One thing with the liquid that is, I think, is really effective is make sure it's fresh. Make sure it's only, if you can get one was packaged only 2 or 3 weeks ago or a month ago, you're going to have much better luck with it than if you're going to get one that's 3 months old and try to do a lager with it. And you're just not going to get the same quality with it. And you're not going to get the same production either. It's just not going to do quite as well. So I always go through the packs. Find the freshest one.
So there's an interesting one with that too. I don't know if people have noticed, because I'll be honest, I haven't brewed quite a bit at all, and I haven't purchased yeast in a while. But I was reading reports online that both Wyeast and White Labs were moving from the date packaged to best buy dates.
Oh.
And so you want to pay attention to that now too. That I don't think Imperial's doing that. I think Imperial's still doing the packaging date, but I could be wrong. But I did remember reading like a month or 2 ago that somebody's put up a big thing on a forum that was just like, what in the hell happened? This now says use by instead of packaged on. So just watch in case you're buying Wyeast or White Labs.
Yeah.
Kelly, you got a Imperial there. What's it say?
You're muted.
Oh,
it has the manufacturing. It's MFG.
okay.
Yeah,
So-
September 10th.
Oh, wow, that's a good one.
Wow, it's time to brew.
Jason's really good too. If you can call him, if you know you're going to brew like 2 weeks in advance or something like that, you can call him and say, could you check this yeast? What's the date on it? And if you're not comfortable buying that, you can ask him next time he does a yeast buy to pick you up a package. He'll order a package for you on that, so you can get even a fresher one.
JT asked the question, how are you supposed to estimate cell count? I'm assuming you're talking about with the new packaging dates. I don't know. And if I figure out how, if somebody has shared that,
Thanks, Andrew.
I mean, yes, Andrew's correct. You can count them one by one. Or, actually going through doing the cell count process. Dana's also saying she can run them. But it is an interesting conundrum to be put in with that. It's a pretty drastic change from what homebrewers are so used to, because it is a relatively new one. And also, supposedly we're moving into fall. What is this, 90-degree weather we're supposed to be getting this week?
Second summer.
That was supposed to be a month ago.
Yeah, this is the false one.
Yeah, not a lager week.
Gonna give me more
Don't
figs.
start it this
It's
week.
our payback for the smoke.
Yeah, like knocked off like 20 degrees on, the average for the week. So it was like 100 degrees, barely cracked 70 because it was smoke apocalypse.
Yeah.
Good grief.
It cleared up just in time for our move. Like it was like a day or two like after the smoke cleared that we did our big move. It's the next day, apparently.
Yeah, I was actually eyeballing brewing some lager this weekend. I've got some malted rice I need to play around with, so we'll see. Kelly, I will share that malted rice with you whenever you want it.
I know, I just have to think of something to do with it. I just keep forgetting. I'm doing cider and then I'm doing mead and then I'll work on that one.
Yeah.
Bud Light.
Yeah.
What?
Bud Light.
Oh, Bud Light, right.
I mean,
Isn't it the black rice? No, it's not black.
One of them is, yeah.
Yeah, purple beer.
Yep. Yeah, brew that 1030, American light lager, and you got your yeast. You got your yeast growing up. Oh,
black.
Has anyone tried to use blue corn to make a beer? It's been on my
Like
would this
chicha?
work?
You gonna chew it up and spit it?
Yeah, sure. Some chicha azul.
And I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah, we should have a chicha party where we all just chew up corn and spit it.
As long as we're
A
not
group
like passing it around the
chicha
line.
party.
Let's see
Yeah.
COVID safe.
Yeah.
That's the logical end of the of COVID is when we can all get together and chew chicha and spit together. Like that's
There you go.
well, I mean,
That is the only time it's good.
But we're still gonna
That is how
boil
much I
it.
miss you guys.
so-
I would make a chicha beer with you.
Absolutely, yeah.
I assume everyone's seen the Dogfish Head video, the YouTube video that went around when they
Yeah.
were doing it. So gross.
Yeah,
Like
he had the whole
people working.
company.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
He had the whole
butter down.
company chewing corn and spitting. Yeah, that was
perfect-
crazy.
The
I can
perfect
just-
Mr. Matt.
women,
We
because
can just
women
do
have more
the
enzymes
impression.
in their mouths. Ah, spider.
Hey, that
You're
would be a
outside,
big. That would
dude.
be a
They
great.
live there.
Yeah, but they don't.
That would be a great big brew beer for us. We all just get together and chew corn.
We
spit.
would make we would make probably Zimmergy. I bet we could get a spot if we all did a big brew chicha. Big brew chicha.
Subcontext,
it.
like 40 people get food poisoning. Like,
That would be the weekly story.
Saying
Yeah.
it's still gonna get boiled. How much bacteria can survive those
20
temperatures?
cases of diverticulitis break out.
And
Oh, you don't swallow, it's fine.
I'm just saying, to quote somebody in our country, it's a miracle. It'll all just go away.
April. You don't need to quote Billy Graham to us, okay?
All right, I'll leave that. Yeah.
oh,
I think Toby made a blue corn beer when he was at Agrarian, so he would be one to talk about.
yeah, I was just curious if it retains any of the color or not. Probably not.
No,
No,
I don't recall that it did. It was more a flavor impact.
I don't know if any of you guys watch like Basic Brewing or like they have like a YouTube channel. I've been doing it for years, but they make like an annual Halloween beer out of like kids cereals, and they made one out of Boo Berry like one year, and it was the most terrifying change of colors over the course. If you haven't seen this, you should watch it. Maybe I'll put it up somewhere. It's frightening, but the final beer comes out a shockingly normal beer color, despite.
Iron Brewer one year at Tom and Terry's, the secret ingredient
Yes.
was breakfast cereals. And
It
a couple
was-
people got ones that had color in them, and when you watch that go,
Lucky
Yeah,
Charms.
It was the Lucky Charms, the rainbow that slowly dissolved into a gray mush. It was beautiful.
It was awful. It was like some kind of like psychedelic tie-dye baby puke thing.
You haven't seen Baby Puke. It was like gruel. It turned into gruel, basically.
Matt, if you want something that's bluish, I have butterfly pea blossoms that will impart a very blue to purple color.
Yeah, I've seen those. They're terrifying.
There's no flavor. They're amazing.
Yeah, they're crazy.
So that would be a good challenge, like an Iron Brewer thing. So we go on color more than anything else. So you're like
Closer, Casper.
purple,
Cocktails?
blue, yellow.
Put this in
Yeah.
cocktails, yeah, and it's pea protein and sugar, and it makes it a gross color.
I thought it said blur.
Yeah,
It does. It almost
Yes.
says yeah. Blur.
It's like made by Liz Lemon.
Yeah. So Matt, if Matt wants to borrow this, it didn't work in cocktails. It made him a gross color.
Okay, so now I'm thinking about a new style of beer called a tie-dye beer.
If you can make
How
that
do we
happen,
make that happen?
yeah.
I don't know. I'm just
suspension
throwing it
bubbles.
out there. This is
It's kind of like that glitter
This is
beer
where-
folks that happened a year ago.
great ideas are born. You just throw something
I
out.
think I got this one, you guys. Okay, you know those like drain cleaners that have the two different spouts and two different liquids, but it's like the same cleaner. It's going to be that, but with fruited like smoothie IPAs, and you pour them at the same time, so it creates a layered effect of two different color beers.
Yeah,
And if
that's
they-
what I was thinking.
And
Do
with the
different beers have different
cage-
weights?
Yeah.
You could do like a
Packaging
black
maybe.
and tan, except with different colors.
Yeah,
I think that's
black and
brilliant.
tan. Yeah.
Pink and
That's
purple and glitter.
Done. Good job, Brent.
Oh yeah, we got to throw glitter in. Got to go glitter. Yeah.
I have glitter for whomever wants to glitter their beer.
I have
Is
a
it for
kilo.
beer or is it just like edible glitter?
Edible glitter.
It's like titanium
I
dioxide.
have some of that. I have gold.
So it's also a good sunblock.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's also a good sunblock.
yeah. It's turned into a
Only if
paste.
you drink it internally, and then you're just like,
Well, then you can't inject yourself with UV rays or whatever. So
Then you're just so.
Not how that works. That's not how any of this works.
Finn is like, no, my head's going to explode. It's wrong.
We're in the science fiction parody realm now. We're talking about tie-dye beers.
Yeah.
Just wait, man. Just wait. It'll happen.
just saying.
And he'll miss out. He could have made all the money, and yeah.
It's going to be the new haze craze.
No, they thought that like a year or two ago. Never really took off.
The tie-dye beers?
Oh, tie-dye, sure, go for it.
That's what I'm saying. That'll
Oh, I
be
thought
the
you
new
were talking
haze
about glitter
craze.
beers.
Tie-dye is not a flavor. You're going to be up there telling us all.
It's all
Thanks,
about
Kelly.
presentation.
It's the best line ever. I want it on a t-shirt.
So it'll be old Matt and then angry Matt. That'll be Actually, I've been told I cannot be called angry Matt.
No, you can't.
Because of Matt Beatty. Matt Beatty is angry Matt. So I've been demoted to grumpy Matt.
No, I think actually, old Matt is either angry Matt or grumpy Matt. So I think he
Or
got
all of
those.
the above.
I don't know what that
Yeah, he
makes
still
me,
owns
I guess.
that.
You have a mentor that you can look up to.
Yeah. Technically, I look down to Matt.
Yeah, actually, I need to reconnect with him.
Oh, that's pretty
He
tall.
lives so close by. He's gotten so reclusive. I think I need to reach out and see how he's doing.
He was on a happy hour or was he on a meeting at one point? I remember seeing him inside the